Hey David, how's it going?
Good.
Um,
How are you, Andy?
I'm good. I'm good. Wanted to intro you a little bit and Facet Design
Mhm.
and just ask, what is the design process? How did you come up with your company? What's your experience kind of led you to as an owner of a business like that?
I appreciate it. Yeah, I am a licensed architect, and I'm the qualifier for our general contractor's license also. But so this all came about from my co-founder, and I got together. We both worked for a company that I ran the architecture side, he ran the construction side, and he had over 30 years experience as a plumber before being a general contractor, and I had over 30 years of being an architect and in construction trades. So we just kind of sat down and said, how could this be process be better? And so we looked at 500 projects we did and over 200 church projects and said, what do church clients really need? And we said, all right, it's three things: clarity on how dollars are spent, not just the price. So design choices actually maximized the impact of their goals. Second was transparency in contracts and in the process that aligned the architect, the contractor, the owner, and that it still put the project first for everybody. And then third was early and continuous budget clarity. The reality of needing real cost range in pre-design and refined as steps as you go in that process.
Perfect. Yeah, I think you kind of covered some of my next question. I was kind of curious is like, how is design build different than a traditional method of get an architect, go get a contractor and a quote? Like, what are some of the best
Sure.
advantages from your experience?
Yeah, so the common concern about design build um, is that it uses the budget to justify shortcuts. I'd love to explain that when you set up that the number, the final number, is the thing that makes all the decisions. That's great that a contractor understands that, but the owners typically don't know what that means. So ours is an architect and general contractor led owner first process. And so it's open book, it's accountable, and every decision is made in the open. 100% of the unspent budget returns to the owner. We charge a flat monthly fee to take responsibility and lead the construction process. And it's not a percentage of the construction cost, which we consider a conflict of interest.
Yeah, it makes you want to make the construction costs maybe more expensive and reap the benefits of that for sure. So I guess a part of that question, like, how does the contract stuff work? How do the fees work that we would engage with your company? What's the general sentiment on that?
Yeah, one of the biggest differences that we use is we don't use the AIA, which is the architect's contract, or the AGC, which is a general contractor's contract. We found a group called Design Build Institute of America. And what we like about it is you set it up is that you sign a contract to be both the designer and the builder of the project. But in the middle of it, you actually rewrite the contract, the general conditions of the contract with the owner. So it's a part of the process that engages all three of you together, not one party passing around what they want and then sending it off to the lawyers. And we've seen great response to that, including our clients' attorneys have loved the process and said, why doesn't this exist before?
Yeah. Um, in a summary of design build, what's the general steps? I know we kind of touched on a little bit, but like, what are the big kind of pillars that you use to help clients make a decision on what to do, how to do it, what's it cost?
Yep. So what we call them the four Ds in one team. So first is discovery, which is basically pre-design. It helps you clarify the mission. It gives us information about your site. What are the codes, the building codes and the zoning codes? And then what are the cost range for this type of project in this area projected down the line? And then you can move on to the second D, being design. to come up with a concept to basically act as a prototype and give us more information, cost and otherwise. But it's there to test the options against the budget and against the goals. There's always multiple ways to design something, but our process, instead of spending the entire time doing a set of documents to get a permit, is on a small scale testing prototypes of what their cost would be. So once you find one that works, we move on to documentation, which is actually the permit documents, but it's also the documents that get bought out in the construction. So you're getting input from trades and vendors of what that process as you're doing the documents. And then again, putting together another budget. How does that refine with better information? More detail equals a sharper number. And then finally, once we feel like we've got that's the project, that's the scope, and that's the budget that we want to set, then it's delivery or called construction. It's the same team that builds that. It's funny how we actually have people on the design side that end up on the construction site and vice versa. So that's what we start, and then we build in delivery a weekly transparent update of what's going on. And then monthly, we get together and show here's what the cost has been spent and what's going to be spent in the next 30, 60, 90 days, because then that helps the owner and the church be able to, use their money more wisely.
Perfect. Well, you led me into my next question. Then on cost and kind of twofold.
Mhm.
What happens if cost of materials or labor, just the way the economy kind of moves, what happens when those costs go up and down? And then how do
Mhm.
you really kind of fit that into what's the ROI for the development and what you're actually going to build?
Yeah, great question. So the contingencies from day one, even in pre-design, you're being pretty broad about what should this cost. You're also trying to project it into the future. And we know what the annual percentages are of construction. And then, yes, there are sometimes these blips, but that's why you always have to have a contingency. Now, in a design bid build or the other version of design build, the contractor kind of pads everything to make sure that it's being there. We put a big number out there because of whether it's under that, then that savings goes back to the owner or back to the contingency as however they want to spend it. It's not the general contractor's contingency. But as far as how that translates to return on investment, it's unique for churches. It's not just about the number of seats or the number of usable spaces. It is about both of how they equate to the cost of the total project of how much usable space is there. And that's just efficiency of design. Then you get into the durability and maintenance over the decades. And part of that is not compromising the first cost. In other words, trying to hold every dollar out of this budget because it may be something like a mechanical unit that breaks at the worst possible time during it's just ages out, 5 to 7 years out, versus adding a little bit more cost up front and making that stretch to 10 so it doesn't impact the church's budget. And then that comes also happens to occur in the energy performance of operating costs. Of yeah, you could go with a cheaper piece, but it's going to actually translate to more energy bills during the first 3 years where it might be the hardest to pay for. And then finally, that return on investment is about the flexibility. How can we use it as often as we can for the mission, not just income and donations, but also for actual use. And so that's a unique measure of how do you equate the return on investment for a church?
Perfect. Yeah, I think it gives a lot more clarity to the full thought process.
Right.
Um, this would be the first church that I've been a part of. You've done over 200.
Mhm.
What what have you learned doing 200 plus projects like this about churches where, sometimes the shortcomings that folks like me may not see and you have experience with, what are
Sure.
the benefits of some of those things, just given your experience over those number of projects?
Yeah, like I said, my partner and I figured out what do churches really need in those first three things, but the other part of the other fence of getting saying what are the things that typically lead you off into the swamp, off the rails per se. And we've seen there's kind of three traps. One is an unclear scope, where you're not defining truly what are the needs. And that's not talking to enough users or talking to too many user groups about those things, but not getting it clarified. Um, so the second is the late cost discovery. The problem with design, bid, build is you don't find out what the cost of it is until much later, and it's too late to make easy adjustments. You can make big value engineering adjustments, but it's this process that helps do that. And then the last thing we found is the adversarial contracts. Back to, is it the AIA? Is it the AGC? Or is it something that's a little more collaborative when you put together those contracts and you have the opportunity to talk about what is the expected roles for each things from the owner, the contractor, the architect, and everybody else that's going to be on your property. And how do you protect the owner and the church for all those things? So we see if it's between those first three questions and making sure we don't go across these fences, the last three things, that we add weekly dashboards, budgets, schedules, decision matrix to be able to say, here's when you have to make these choices. There's always going to be choices to make. And that kind of helps you avoid the crisis management version of construction that we don't like to do and nobody enjoys.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things that I've learned and enjoyed in the experience is, hey, here's some decisions we have to make.
Mm.
You make those whenever you want to. And then once we make those decisions, you have this timeline to make your next big decision. And we can kind of do that at whatever pace is appropriate for us and where we're at in that conversation. The other thing I think has been beneficial is some of the small decisions, right? Like, hey, what's this floor going to be? Or how do we know that's going to come and be in stock when we want this floor versus that floor, or this paint versus that paint? I think that gives a lot more flexibility to us as project owners, really, as a building committee, to have input on controlling cost and selection of items throughout that process. Like it's not so dictated from the contractor as to what kind of happens.
Mm. Good. That's good.
Um, I guess for me, any final thoughts on moving forward with the project? What do you think is kind of next in the timeline? Big milestones to consider?
Hmm. So we are currently in documentation. So we're at our mid-design review to make decisions. And so we have more information from the engineers and the vendors, the architects and finishes. Now we're about to get ready to get through and to say, how does this affect our budget? And then make decisions to then finish off those items. That way we'll have another round of cost from better information because there's more drawings to give and there's more information to share. So this will be number three of the five that we end up doing before we actually move into breaking ground. And so, as part of that, you know, I think churches deserve more than a nice rendering and a construction contract with an arbitrary number attached. They deserve clear, accountable path. And we hope that our version of this kind of brings more knowledge, more choice, and therefore more stewardship from that project. And that happens from day one, where we get together, talk about what should we do, to way beyond Dedication Sunday into how they operate and use the tool.
Yeah, that's the one thing I thought is really beneficial to us as a congregation and building committee too is and such a detailed list on all of those costs, how they're managed, the timeline in which they're managed. I think that part feeds into a lot of like how good that contract is for the person you're working with or the group that you're working with. Because it's very easy to see, and even when it comes to the financial piece of that, paying the bills. Hey, these things have been completed.
Mhm.
I know they're completed because I can physically see them done. That work is done, and we're going to pay these folks that were contractors to do these things. and there's always a clear delineation on what is expected for us as a payment, how we manage that,
Mhm.
and allows us to slow down that time if we need to a little bit or accelerate that timeline if we can. I think there's a lot of good functional work between what the contract language says and what actually happens swinging the hammers.
Agreed. It's time is the opportunity that ends up spending money either intentionally or unintentionally. And that's kind of why we said if we can help educate the difference between A and B and let you make the decision, that's always the best. And that's not something that typically happens in the construction process these days. So
Well, perfect. Thank you for your time.
thank you. I've enjoyed working and looking forward to how this whole project changes the community. You have a unique project here.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited to see um, how many more people come as a result of the project. And it's already very eye-opening to see because I live right next to the church. How many people are actually there every day?
Yeah.
People with their dogs that live in the townhouses, people that come for the bulb to do, community food giving, summer camp with gosh, I don't even know. There was probably 40 kids there one day. So
Yeah.
just seeing the activity that goes on in that space and be able to have a much more functional building to suit all those needs, but then suit needs that are even beyond those, right? Like
Mm.
we're thinking of all these things going forward of how do we engage the community more when it comes to events and celebrations and weddings and all those type of things that we're in a very unique space
Mhm.
where the traffic alone is very robust, but then the community around it is also a large number of folks there. I think we
Mhm.
have a really cool opportunity to do something very impactful to the community
Mhm.
that isn't a business, right? I think it will become part of that, but more a good hybrid between what a business can offer to make a community better, but really what a ministry can do to engage the community and feel more interconnected.
I agree. You're going to have a great event place just to share.
Well, thanks again.
Thank
Look
you.
forward to seeing you soon.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Andy.